to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. Oh, because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to our God in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to our God in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden, burdened with a load of care? Precious Savior, still a refuge. Take it to our God in prayer. Do your friends despise, forsake you? Take it to our God in prayer. Jesus loves to care and shield you. You will find a solace there. You will find a solace
A reading from the book of Exodus. Now a man from Levi's household married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that the baby was healthy and beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket and sealed it up with black tar. She put the child in the basket and set the basket among the reeds at the riverbank. The baby's older sister stood watch nearby to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river. While her women servants walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. The boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." Then the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed, "Yes, do that." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for your work." So the woman took the child and nursed it. After the child had grown up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, "I pulled him out of the water."
Will you pray with me? Loving God, we thank you for the example of Miriam, for the example of all of the prophets who had a dream. May our time together this morning fill us with a vision of what this world could be. Amen. Well, it's a little hard to imagine today, but there was a time when people had to do the things that computers do for us today, things like math. If you ponder for a minute the calculations that are required to launch a spaceship into orbit, think of NASA's supercomputers. Even the Jeopardy-winning Watson was deployed to help NASA with these calculations. But as we know, in the very early days of the space program, those calculations were done by people. And I'm thinking particularly of those black women whose story was told in the film Hidden Figures. One of those women was named Miriam Mann. Miriam joined the agency in 1943. The U.S. was involved in World War II at that point. Women were moving into the workforce in new ways. But despite her incredible ability to do math with nothing but a pencil and a slide rule, thankfully I don't even know what one of those is, Miriam was relegated to eat at a table in the back of the cafeteria and to do her work in a segregated unit. She and the others who did that work, brilliant mathematicians, had stories that really went unknown to most of us and went untold for decades. All of the accolades for the space program, well, they went to the men. Today, we continue our series on women in the Hebrew Bible. Thank you to those of you who made it through last week's story of Tamar. It was a tough one and definitely took us in some unusual places. Her unusual plight, her practical enslavement by Judah, and how she found a courageous path to free herself. Well, now we move forward to the book of Exodus and the story that we've touched on already today of Miriam and Moses. So, we are in the context of the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. This is familiar for those of us who've been in church. There's a burning bush, there's the parting of the Red Sea. Moses, right? He gets all of the credit. Well, guess what? There are some hidden figures in this story too, and in fact today we're talking about one of them named Miriam. In fact, many commentators call her the leading lady of Exodus. A little later, the prophet Micah, who is speaking for God, says, "For I brought you up from the land of Egypt, I redeemed you from the house of bondage, and I sent before you Moses and Aaron, the brother, and Miriam." So it begs the question, what role did this hidden figure play in the liberation of God's people? We're talking about Israel and their exodus from Egypt and how they were miraculously liberated from slavery. It is a key story in the arc of the Hebrew Bible and even the narrative of Jesus. It's commemorated each year with the celebration of Passover, but today we're going to look at Miriam. Now, at this point, the Israelites have been living in the land of Egypt for 350 years. Now, how did they get there? They went there because of famine. There was no food growing in their land, and their brother Joseph was there, and they were provided for. They were welcomed as strangers in a new land. They were embraced by the Egyptians, and they were given a fertile area called Goshen, not the one in Litchfield County. The first years there were good years. But what happened to these strangers in a foreign land? The public tide turned against them. They were considered foreigners and they were enslaved. You see, just before our reading today, we come to understand they have a new leader, a new Pharaoh. This new Pharaoh sows seeds of fear against these immigrants in his land. He doesn't know them. He doesn't care to know their story. Now, we're focused on Miriam today, but I want to point out there's some wisdom to be gleaned here. He sees this group coming over the border to his territory. He doesn't like their presence. To him, they posed a threat to his power. In fact, the text says that the Pharaoh says to the people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and are mightier than we. Let us deal with them wisely, or else they'll multiply, and in the event of war, they will join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us. They're getting too big in number. What if we can't control them anymore? What if they forget to stay in their place in our land? So Pharaoh conspires against them. The Israelites find themselves losing this goodwill that they have and all of a sudden being enslaved. The Egyptians make their lives unbearable, miserable. But the plan doesn't work. You see, the harder life becomes, the more they flourish. They have babies and they're growing in number, and a new Pharaoh rises to power and decides it's time to murder them. So any Israelite baby boy should be drowned in the Nile River. I can't help but think of the images of people crossing hostile waters to come here. And it's then that we meet a young girl and her enslaved family. Her name is Miriam. She is the oldest of the siblings. She has a younger brother, Aaron, and her mother, Jochebed, is expecting. And if that child is a boy, he is to be killed and drowned in the river on the day that he is born. But tradition states that Miriam had a dream. She had a dream that this baby in her mother's womb would be the one to rescue her people. She's 6 years old at this time, just 6, but has a dream for what the future could be. Jochebed gives birth to this baby, a boy, and they keep it a secret. They are determined to hide him as long as they possibly can. You can hide a baby for about 3 months. Maybe you can say, oh, it's a girl. I'm not sure. But now 3 months has passed, and they can no longer hide this baby from the Egyptian authorities. It's an amazing act of faith. They turn Moses over to the Lord. They do what Pharaoh's law said. They throw him in the river, but he's in a basket that is sealed and is waterproof. And this Miriam, 6, maybe 7 years old at this point, the daughter of an enslaved family, an unlikely heroine, plays a vital role in the life of her brother as this story unfolds. She follows along the shore to keep her eyes on the basket. And then, one of Pharaoh's daughters, a princess of Egypt, comes down to the river to bathe, and she sees the basket and finds a baby. Now she knows this is an Israelite baby, and she knows what her father has commanded must be done, but she also decides to save this boy's life. And little Miriam, our heroine today, she goes into action. She goes to Pharaoh's daughter. Shall I call and get a nurse for this baby from the Hebrew women that can nurse the child? The princess says, yes. Miriam goes and finds her mother, the mother of Moses. And Jochebed arrives, and verse 9 tells us, Pharaoh's daughter says, take this child and nurse him for me, and I'll give you wages. The woman took and nursed him. This is amazing providence. Moses is back in the arms of his mother, and now she's getting paid by the daughter of the Pharaoh to nurse her own child. Clever little Miriam. Like last week and the week before, we see women with no options, but they find creative and courageous ways to work out justice. Now, a lot happens between here and Exodus 15. I'll save that for another time. But as God promises, Moses is the one to lead his people back to their land. As they are about to cross the Red Sea, as Pharaoh's army is on their heels, the sea opens up and they cross, and the sea closes and crashes in on Pharaoh's army. As Lauren talked about, Miriam the prophetess, sings her song of praise. She is leading the women in worship in her song. She says, sing to the Lord, for God is highly exalted. The horse and the rider God has hurled to the sea. Like Hannah, like Deborah, and one day, Mary, the mother of Jesus. The women sing their songs of praise. They sing their songs of triumph. Miriam becomes the first woman to be called a prophet. And it is Miriam who leads a song of praise that begins a tradition that goes on for generations and generations. It's not always easy. The book of Numbers gives us a difficult story about Miriam after fleeing Egypt, after wandering in the wilderness. We hear of Miriam's complaints. She complains that Moses has married a Cushite woman, a Cushite being a woman from the modern-day land of Ethiopia. But God reminds her that she too is a prophet. In a strange turn of the text, God punishes Miriam. She develops a skin disease and is banished for 7 days. But here's the deal. The people don't move on without their Miriam. They wait for her healing, for her to return, and Moses stands up for Miriam and intercedes and asks God for healing. Miriam would live to be 120 years old and be mourned as a great prophet. I think there are some things we can take from Miriam's story today. The first, as a young girl, God gave her a dream of who her brother would be and how her people could be liberated. On Wednesday night, Pastor Molly Basquette talked about God having a dream for us. She shared how a dream is different, is bigger than just a plan. I love that. The idea that a dream is bigger than a plan. So we today should find ourselves asking, what is our dream? What dream has God planted in us? And maybe most importantly, are we listening to the dreams of our children and what future they dream of for themselves? Second, let's look at the women of power in this story. It is not just Miriam, but women like her mother Jochebed, women like the Pharaoh's daughter. They had no reason to be working together, to be aligned, but here they are, across social status, working together to right the injustice that said Moses should be drowned at birth. Women in solidarity, women reaching across racial and social differences. This is a power that can't be denied. And I want to say that I think this is the great challenge of our world and our time today when the lines seem so clearly drawn. Our divided culture. Can we find a way to work together, to overcome division and enter into conversation? It's not easy, and I have to be honest, I lose hope regularly. But then I come here, and I see all of you on Sunday morning, Sunday after Sunday, with a desire to be community together, strengthened by our diversity, strengthened by our differences. And it gives me hope. In fact, it gives me a dream for just what could be possible beyond this hour we spend on Sunday morning. Thirdly, I think Miriam reminds us that there are stories of hidden figures all around us, unsung heroes whose stories might be buried in the power of the patriarchy. We can recenter stories to remember that those who record history really are never free of the bias and influence of their own culture. We can recenter the story of Moses and focus on the women who made it possible for Moses to lead the people across the Red Sea. Miriam is a Hebrew name, but Miriam is also the namesake of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Both Miriam and Mary play important parts in liberation. Both ensured the safety of their children from wicked rulers who had called for their death. Both women were used by God in unfolding God's dream of liberation. Both were prophets, not calling for the conservation of a system that oppresses, but in a true prophetic voice, a vision of liberty and justice for all. Where are those voices today? Are they hidden figures in our world? How can we tune our hearing to hear those? Miriam Mann was forced to sit alone, her story untold until decades later. Friends, we don't have to wait for Hollywood to make a movie. Miriam's faith was rewarded, her dream was realized, her prophecy fulfilled, and she sang, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously." That is the story of Miriam. May it be so in our world today. Amen.